Let's bring in our first guest. It's PK Subban. You remember him. 3-time NHL All-Star. Guy won the Norris Trophy for Best NHL Defenseman. Now you see him on TV. What's up, PK?
Guys, thanks for having me on.
You got
Appreciate it.
Of course. How you doing, man?
Can you guys hear me?
It looks like
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Are you cold? It looks like you got a coat on.
Yeah, well, dude, it's Saturday night Montreal. I'm definitely not staying in my room all night. So yeah, I'm getting ready. After the interview, I'm gonna go have a nice dinner. I'm gonna hang out with some friends, and then tomorrow I take off, go back to New York. But I'm gonna enjoy some hockey. I'm watching some hockey right now. Actually, I'm watching Habs and Winnipeg right now going at it. So,
Hey, I hope you don't have a bunch of freeloader friends who just think that you need to pick up the tab all the time because you had 13 successful seasons in the league, right? They're not
freeloader friends? Are you talking about this guy? Are you talking about that guy right there?
Exactly.
No, I'm joking. Hey, by the way, hold on. No, I can't do him dirty. This is my boy Sean Over, been a friend of mine for 16 years.
Nice.
Put in
Very
his
cool.
time, 16 years. And so whenever I'm in Montreal, I come and see him. All right, Over, you got your team.
Very
time.
cool.
Very nice.
There you go.
So, speaking of Montreal, I'm sure you saw Tom Wilson's exploits the other night when he took a wrister from Chicky right off of his left cheek. And he was
I did see that.
obviously in pain, skates off to the training room, comes back, scores 2 goals, and by the end of the game, it looked like his face looked like the volleyball from Castaway growing on the left side of his face. I mean, crazy warrior-like performance by Tom Wilson, but I mean, you know how Tom Wilson is, super tough guy. You don't expect anything less from him and most of these guys on the Caps team.
Not to take anything away from Tom Wilson, I think anybody that watches hockey, let alone has played against Tom, knows what he brings to the ice every night. But, I mean, man, I'm no longer debating with people about who the toughest athletes are. You saw what happened to Michael McCarron. He's got the skate sliced right by his face. Like, people have no idea the risk that we all take on as hockey players when we step out over the gate and onto the ice to play the game. I mean, anything can happen, but I'm not surprised. I mean, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a guy who embraces that part of the game, and we all do. You know, some guys are a little bit tougher than others, but make no doubt about it, the standard to play in the National Hockey League and play at that level, you have to be willing to do things like that. And that's why the Washington Capitals, and you guys said it, I heard you guys when you didn't have me on earlier, I heard you guys talking in the background, and you had said no one had picked the Washington Capitals. I hope you didn't put me in that category. I hope you didn't put me in that category because if you go back and watch the tapes, when we did one of our first shows, I said, you guys got to watch this team. Nobody thought the Washington Capitals were going to do anything this season, which I thought was insane. I looked at the moves that they made this offseason on defense, bringing in Chikrin. You knew Carlson was going to come back healthy. Their goaltending was shored up. Listen, their young players are now ready to make a step. Anybody watching the Washington Capitals over the past 2 seasons knew what was coming. And then when you put Spencer Carberry, everybody knows how much I love Spencer Carberry and the job that he's done there. But as a coach, he's squeezed as much juice out of this group through their younger years as you possibly could have. And now what you're seeing is the maturity come into the Washington Capitals. That confidence was built in them getting through the playoffs. Listen to me, there was a number of teams that were fighting for that playoff spot. They beat out a lot of those teams. That confidence has carried into this season. Not everything does, but that's one thing that this team was sure about is that they could compete, and they've done more than just compete this season.
Welcome back. It is the Junkies Altcast. We're taking over Monumental Sports 2, watching the Caps, who are down 1-0 early in the game. Jason, you were asking our guest, PK Subban from ESPN, all about Spencer Carberry.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. He's just done a great job, especially this year, because we did not expect this. I know you did, but we did not expect this offensive output, and they're just doing an unbelievable job. And one of the best goal-scoring teams in the league right now. Just talk about the job that Carbs has done so far in your eyes.
Listen, I couldn't see the future. The one things that I do know, or the few things that I did know about the Washington Capitals, were that they were well coached, because I watched the team last year that should have been in the playoffs with the roster that they had, as far as I could see, based on how they matched up on paper against other teams and the way other teams were playing. I didn't see them getting. I saw the Washington Capitals get better when everybody else faltered that was on the bubble because of inexperience, youth, maybe holes in their lineup, Washington, whenever they were faced with adversity, they answered the bell. And to me, that's a willingness to grow, to get better, to really, really believe that you can take that next step individually as a player. And that starts with the coach. That starts with management. It's so difficult to develop players at this level. The NHL is not a development league. When you come into the NHL, you got to be ready to play. If you don't know how to play, they'll give you a couple games, but at the end of the day, if you can't get the job done doing what they need you to do, they got to win. So for him to have gotten so many young players, you look at McMichael, you look at Protas, you look at some of these young guys that have come in, Strome, who has come into his own. All these guys have come into their own at the right time, and I believe that Spencer Carberry has helped take them to that next level. But forget that. Getting the older guys and the veteran guys to buy in and how seamless that was for him. You can't gloss over that. That's a very, very difficult thing to do. Alex Ovechkin has played with a lot of players that he's played with a long time. Well, there's a lot of different players on this team now, and he's still finding ways to score. Carberry's still keeping him involved. He's not the same player he was 10 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, and he's still as effective. So a lot of that is coaching, managing his minutes, understanding how to use them, how to bring them into the young guys, putting them with the right players, allowing Dylan Strome to grow into that Backstrom type of role. So to me, that's all coaching. It is players going out and doing the work, but I believe he's done an exceptional job. And, you put anybody else in there, I'm not sure this team does as well as they've done over the past 2 seasons. And for me, it's the attention to details. He's getting, you look at Sandin, who couldn't crack the Toronto Maple Leafs lineup, is playing there. He still makes mistakes. He's still the same player, but he's put a system where this guy's protected. He can flourish into his own. We've seen his game grow. Trevor Van Riemsdyk, that D-core has played phenomenal for them. Their goaltending has covered up a lot of the mistakes. We know that they still got holes in that lineup, but you can't sit here and tell me that the Washington Capitals haven't played above and beyond what everybody expected them to. And why is that? Well, you got to look at the coach. You got to give the coaching and management credit for how they've managed these players and developed them. It's hard to develop players in this league. When you see players take that step, I watched that Protas. I mean, man, with his size, that kid's only going to get better and better. They bring in Lars Eller. I like the moves. They bring in Brana, a guy that's familiar. I think that their team's got a lot of chemistry in that locker room.
PK
and they've
loves
done it
the
so quickly
Caps.
with some new players. Love the Caps.
Yeah.
Listen, I got to call it down the middle. I got no attachment to them. Other than this guy did, this Spencer Carberry was his teammate. I actually found out at the University of Alaska in Anchorage. So he's a super fan, but I don't even think I've met Carbs.
Right.
I've never met Carbs before, but I watched so much hockey, and I've watched the Washington Capitals because, with everything with the fans and their team, and this is a team that you definitely want to cheer for. Like, I'm sorry, you watch them play, you want to become a fan. You want to see Ovi do well. You want to see him get that record, but more importantly, they deserve it. I think they play a brand of hockey that's a winning style. And that's why they've beaten great teams. So good on them, and we'll see if it continues throughout the rest of the season.
What's been incredible is that they've tried to thread the needle here for the last 2 years, right? Because they're transitioning from that older roster and then blending in the young guys without bottoming out. That's what's been so shocking. Like, I was waiting for the bottom to fall out like it has for some of our other organizations.
Well, when you look at it, it's not a new recipe. If you look at a bunch of other teams, every team tries to keep their main core group, especially a core group that they've won with. They try to keep, we see it in LA with Doughty and Kopitar. Jonathan Quick was hanging in there for a little bit. Now he's gone. But you see it in Pittsburgh with Crosby and these guys. Obviously, in Colorado, there's a core that's there now that they're probably going to try to milk as much out of as they can. So in Washington, you got Ovi, you got Carlson. They were able to retool their goaltending situation. Obviously, they're missing Oshie. Like, think about that. Imagine TJ Oshie, is not in that lineup. This team is still as deep. I still think it's a deep team with all the young players that are there. So I think they've done a great job, but the core is still very good there. Ovi's doing his thing. Carlson's still an elite top 4 defenseman that can lug minutes and play in all situations. But one thing, his shot. His shot from the top is the biggest weapon. When he gets on that power play, that's what makes that whole thing tick. I know everybody wants to say this and say that. You put a lefty up there, it's a different power play over an extended period of time. He is so important to that power play because of his shot from the point, and that's what allows all these seam passes and other plays to work for them. So they're going to have a lot of options, and for them, it's going to be matchups, just how they match up against other teams. I really think that's going to dictate their success down the stretch,
hey,
and we'll see what they do. You know,
real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, speaking
real
of
quick,
matchups, obviously, the Four Nations face-off, which ESPN and ABC are involved with, quickly approaching. It's February 12th through the 20th. 4 teams of NHL players from the U.S., Canada, Finland, and Sweden. It's in Montreal with a championship game in Boston. Talk about that. All the teams are involved. And Coach Carves was a little bit miffed that none of his players were invited to the Four Nations face-off.
You know what? I think that this will be the first of many. You know, I am very optimistic about the Four Nations Cup. You know, we can make a million different tournaments and call them whatever we want. I'm excited about this, not only because ESPN's involved, obviously, and we get to do it, but when you really think about it, these are North American this is North American hockey played on the international stage. So you have NHL players representing their country, essentially playing playoff hockey in the middle of the season for their country. I don't care what anybody says. When you put your country's jersey on, and you know what it's like being from Canada, imagine what it's like for Finland, Sweden, any of these countries that are going against countries in North America, the U.S. and Canada. To me, it's going to be some of the best hockey I think we've seen in a long time. I think it's going to be really competitive. Obviously, there's been so much around the Olympics and whether hockey players are going to go. I think that this is something where we can truly look at and say this is best on best. These are the best players in the world from these countries that are going to go at it. And I think the first of many is going to be great, but I think it's also going to be great because we're going to see into the future and what it's going to look like for many years to come. There's a lot of young, talented players that are going to be on display. And when you see the way these teams are built, you know what type of hockey we're looking at. And this is going to be playoff hockey, I think, in the middle of the season. And might be something we're not used to seeing when we see players wearing Team Canada, Sweden jerseys. But there's guys on every country, on every team that can fight. So you know this. No one's backing down. They're going to go toe-to-toe. I think it's going to be some awesome hockey to watch. I really do.
PK, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about your relationship with Ovi. You were at the All-Star game with him last year. We'll maybe talk about some run-ins you had with Ovi over the years as well, right here on the Junkies Altcast. And we're back on Monumental Sports 2. It is the Sports Junkies Altcast. Hanging out with PK Subban. He was just talking about the tournament that's coming up. But we wanted to talk about Ovi. You had a bunch of run-ins, maybe in your career. Maybe you have a favorite, a top moment against Ovi, competing against him. But also, you had a special moment last year at the All-Star game. What are your memories of Ovi? And we were all kind of surprised with the hot start, to be honest with you, because last year it did not start off great, picked up second half of the season. So talk a little about Ovi.
Well, I'll tell you something. And in talking about Ovi, I feel like you can't talk about Ovi or Crosby without mentioning the other. And it's always difficult in my job to be critical of those guys because, first, being honest, I'm a fan. If you love the game and you play the game, you're a fan of all great players, regardless of whether you've battled against them or not.
Hey,
you can
I'm curious,
appreciate
PK,
guys. And
I'm curious, when you would play him, you know, what would the scouting report be? I mean, would they even bother? Like, you know it. You'd play against him so many times. You know where he likes to set up his office and that sort of thing. Like, how would your coaches approach it over the years?
I think when you play against guys like that, there's a team structure, but that's what makes those guys special, is that they're not going to be denied by the structure in which you play in and your defensive schematics. So really what it comes down to is it becomes more personal. And, you know, Ovi has to go up pretty much against the same guys. If he's playing the Leafs, he's seeing the same D pairing all 6 times or 4 times or whatever time they play. So, you know, with me, I always took it personal when I played against him because I knew ultimately you want to be respected. You want to be a guy that's respected, and to be respected, you got to go out and do your job, and you can't be cutting deals. I never cut any deals with Ovi, but the one thing I loved about him was his passion. The guy loves to score goals, and he's never satisfied. Like, you know, when you think about it, you eat food, no matter how good it tastes, you get satisfied. You know what I mean?
Right.
Even if you love chocolate cake, after a while, you're like, okay, it's okay. This guy, I don't know what it is. When he scores, it's like it's the first time all over again.
Yeah,
no
true.
matter how he scores.
So were you surprised
you gotta
by the start?
Appreciate that.
Were you surprised
I was
by
not
the start of the
surprised by
season?
it. And hold on, here's my point. My point initially was that it's difficult to talk about him because you got to be critical in my position. And I was very critical of him last year. I didn't like what I saw because for me, it doesn't represent him. It wasn't a season that represented his career or even where he was at in his career. And I wanted more for him. And I knew that a lot of that had to do, it wasn't just on him. Like everybody's going to look at him and be critical of why he's not scoring. Some of that had to do with the team going through a transition and all of that stuff. And I'm sure that's difficult on him, but he got himself prepared to play, and he was ready to go right from the start. You could see he was in better shape. He was engaged. I think that knowing and being in a losing situation, it's a lot tougher than people think, especially when you're a guy that wants to win, that competes and comes to the rink every day. So, you know, maybe that had a little bit of effect on him last year, but I'll tell you this, he's human. He's allowed to be human, but I'll tell you, when it comes to scoring goals, this guy's not human at all. He's doing it at a pace that no one else has ever done it before in the National Hockey League. He's going to break that record, and I couldn't be more happy for him.
This season?
I hope so. I hope so. I hope so because he's that elite of a scorer. He's always done the impossible that, you know, we never think it's going to be possible, and he finds a way. I'd love him to be able to find a way in this season. What a story it would be for Washington. It'd be great for the Capitals. It'd be great for Spencer Carberry and their
PK,
group.
we got to run. You're the man.
Because they're winning.
Really appreciate you
All
joining
right.
us.
Thank you.
Listen,
Have a good day.
Watch
before
the
I
Four
go,
Nations face
I gotta
off.
give a shout out. I gotta give a shout out to Devo. Devo, I can't come on the Outcast without giving a shout out to my boy.
All right, there it is.
So
Thank you.
Devo,
That's
if you're
PK
listening,
Subban.
shout out.
Watch the Four Nations
Thanks, PK.
face off on ESPN and ABC.